Have you ever walked through an open minefield? I'm about to. What's up guys, and welcome to my review of the latest Blumhouse release, They/Them. And it tells the story of a group of LGBTQ+ characters going off to this isolated conversion camp to have their queer identities reconformed into what is more of an acceptable identity. And while they are all going through increasingly disturbing psychological techniques to undergo this conversion, there is also a psychotic killer stalking the camp. Now, when I first heard this movie announced and all I knew was Blumhouse, Kevin Bacon, and the basic premise of the film, everybody understandably kind of lost their collective shit on the internet going, what are you doing? What the hell is this gonna be? This is gonna be absolutely insane. And I held true to the belief that possibly this was going to be like the movie The Hunt that came out a couple years ago that had a very similar response, where there was a very basic plot synopsis released and the political sides went after each other saying this movie is obviously this, it's obviously going to say this, it's obviously going to hate these people, fuck this thing. And I held hope that this was going to be a lot more nuanced and a lot more creative, like that film ended up being if you actually watched it.
You try to make yourself special. You become they.
And after seeing the film, I can tell you confidently, just like I knew walking into it, there is absolutely going to be a certain group of people that are going to go after this movie purely based off of what the concept is, purely based off of what the cast is comprised of, and purely based off of what their preconceived notions of the underlying message or story is going to be. Just like on the opposite extreme, there's absolutely going to be a group of people that watch this film that are going to praise it no matter what, just because of the inclusion, just because of the representation, and because of the horrific exploration of conversion therapy. And inevitably, everybody that falls in the middle of those two extremes are going to land in this wide spectrum of opinions on whether or not this was effective, entertaining, and an overall well-executed concept. Where do I fall on that spectrum? Let's get into it. Starting off with the positives, the two leads of this film I thought were damn good. Of course, you have Kevin Bacon. He's kind of the top billing name in this film. I love Kevin Bacon as an actor, and I get really excited whenever he goes back to the horror genre because I think that he is really good in it whenever he is given a good film. Films like Hollow Man, films like Stir of Echoes, some of my favorites of all time. And the fact that he's going back to a camp slasher is very fitting, being that he got his start to his career back in 1980 with the original Friday the 13th. And he's awesome here. He is awesome with what he is given. He is kind of the main patriarch of this camp. He is essentially the villain of the story in certain ways, to where he has that charm, he has that charisma and that gravitas that Kevin Bacon brings to all of his best roles. And when the script needs him to be, when the movie needs him to be, he can be a very intimidating presence. And then in your main protagonist role, you have Theo Germain playing Jordan, who is a trans and non-binary character, and they are also equally as good as Kevin Bacon when the script needs them to be. It's a character that is kind of not really morally complicated, but they're at this camp for very specific reasons that don't necessarily fall in with the rest of the cast. So right off of the bat, this character is kind of outcast and is kind of looked at as being a problem, as being kind of the rebellious character. And they very much have to kind of come into the role of leader in certain ways. And I thought that the acting quality was very good for an actor that I've never seen before, as well as the character being one of the more multi-layered characters throughout the film. The movie is very effective when it's focusing on the psychological terror and the psychological trauma of conversion therapy, whenever they have sequences actually showing you things that these camps have done to people and have been known and recorded to have been done to people throughout history. And even in some of the quieter, more subtle moments when it's just characters discussing their life and giving these accounts of how they have to navigate their everyday world by almost compromising their identity or being afraid or ashamed of their identity, it's also another side of really heightening the horror that they're trying to go through here. Just real world life situations that millions of people every single day have to go through. Situations that a lot of us have never gone through and never will have to go through. And it really just puts a spotlight on how just simple day-to-day life can be horror for some of these people.
I have zero interest in not being gay.
There's no judgments in this room.
Sometimes I wish I was invisible.
And there was also one sequence in this movie that, while being a little bit silly in the fact that everybody in this room knew every single word to this song and it almost was choreographed to be a little bit over the top, there's a sequence where right after a very emotional, dark moment with one character, the entire cast kind of breaks out into song, rehearsing this Pink song that it's very much about embracing your identity. And I had fun with that sequence. I thought that it was funny. I kind of laughed at some of the more over the top, a little bit more quote unquote flamboyant characters really leaned into that scene. So in a movie that's very heavy and very dark throughout most of it, that was a scene of levity that I thought was actually pretty well paced, if not a little awkwardly handled, but I enjoyed it. And now moving on to the negatives. And this movie absolutely baffles me, because for something that is clearly very driven by its message and very driven by a certain story that they want to tell, it felt like the entire time they kept undercutting the power of what they were going for by being afraid to offend, being afraid to go too far, being afraid to really show what they're trying to convey. Much like how all of the kill scenes in this movie cut away right before you get the money shot, right before you really get to see what you came to see, they do the same thing with all of the drama and all of the psychological elements, and even through some of the character arcs in this movie, to where right where it feels like it's going to get to a point where we're going to get something interesting out of those elements, it cuts away and it does something else to be safe. You have characters that are going through this conversion therapy, and it feels like it's getting extreme enough and horrific enough to where they're actually going to achieve the conversion to try to highlight how horrific this whole process is, and the end result being even more horrific to a degree, and they don't go there. You have characters that actually want to go to this conversion camp. They're not being forced to go there by their parents or blackmailed to go there by their family. They're going there because they are tired of the horrors of their everyday life, of having to navigate who they are, and they just want to be what they perceive as normal. And you could have even reinforced the horror of the situation by making that character do things and do some extremes to achieve what they came to that camp to go for, and they undercut it, and they just have that person be like, oh, you know, never mind, I don't really want to be here. Like, there was so many things that they set up in here that could have been done in a way to really just reinforce everything that they're trying to get through with this storyline, with these characters, with this message, and it just felt like it was so vanilla, it was so mediocre, it was so afraid to go there, that whatever they were trying to convey just gets lost in the mediocrity. One of the things that horror has always been able to do is go there, go to the extremes, go to the uncomfortable place, to try to open people's eyes, to try to soften them to the things that the movie is trying to say. And the best horror will always succeed in that. But you can't go for the horror side of this situation. You can't call yourself a horror film and market yourself to horror fans and try to achieve that by not being able to go there, by not being able to ask the uncomfortable questions or show us the uncomfortable side of these things. You can't be safe and be horror. And so unfortunately, by the end of this 100-minute stretch of this film, I watched it and felt like I just experienced a story that, no pun intended, kind of felt like it had its balls removed. And a lot of the reason why this movie really fails to come together, unfortunately, is because of the slasher angle that it goes for. Even with the title of They Slash Them, that is how it is written out, they meant to really put forth that this is going to be a slasher film. And the slasher side of this movie is where all of the weakness and all of the poor execution pretty much focuses. You have about an hour of this movie where there's no killing, there's no sight of the killer, there's no mention of the killer, there's no knowledge that kills are even happening. You have the movie open with a slashing sequence, and you have a third act that is very cliche camp slasher. And that hour where that is nowhere to be found is the most effective and the most interesting part of the movie. As soon as it tries to be a slasher movie, the kills suck. There's not really any effective gore, and like I said earlier, it just cuts away and has no impact whatsoever. The identity of the killer was blatantly obvious to me within about 5 minutes of the slasher elements returning in the second and third act. And probably worst of all, the message that they're trying to get across with the actual slasher storyline is intended, at least how I saw it, to be like this counterbalance, like this moment of mediation in this whole argument regarding homophobia and conversion therapy and all of that, and it just fell completely on its face to me. Whenever you have that try to be a part of the story, where you have these two characters having this conversation regarding the motives of the killer, and you're supposed to walk away with that as this secondary message, this little doggy bag that you can take with you along with the conversion therapy side of things, I just sat there baffled going, what the fuck were you trying to convey with that? That is ridiculous. And I found it ridiculous because it completely softens and waters down everything that they have been conveying somewhat effectively in the first hour of the film, and everything that they have somewhat effectively hammered in about conversion therapy and homophobia and the identity crisis that these characters and people like them have to go through. When you insert that message as something right there at the end to kind of throw in last minute, it just does nothing but confuse. It does nothing but dilute what you have already achieved. I don't typically discuss spoilers when it comes to new films, but I don't think this is the type of movie where people are really going to care that much. If you don't want to know any details of the killer's motivation, just skip until I say final thoughts at the bottom or mute it. As far as the motivations of the killer being revealed to where they are going to kill all of the counselors and all of the people that have actually been converted by these camps, and is trying to recruit the main character by the end to say, let's go do it to all the other camps. And so you're left with two groups of villains by the end of this film. You have the conversion camp that is trying to mold people into what they consider to be normal. They're trying to strip people of their identity and trying to teach people that whoever they are is wrong and you need to conform to this, and we're going to go in the most extreme measures possible to achieve that. And then you have the killer that is essentially saying anybody that believes in that, anybody that is afraid of the LGBTQ plus community, anybody that hates that community, they all need to die violently. Come with me. And so through that exchange, through the main character of the film, they're trying to convey this message where she walks away from that at the end and says, both of those are wrong. If you hate the gay community and you think that we should conform, you are wrong. And if you hate those people to the point where you think that they should just be expelled from the earth, you are also wrong. You're left with a conundrum at the end that's like, obviously, yeah, you're not teaching anybody anything with this. And if you had just focused on that one thing, the overall concept of your movie, you don't need to counterbalance that with this. That's what I mean by they're afraid to offend. They're so worried about going hard on this side of the storyline, about the conversion therapy, about the treatment of the gay community, about the horrors that that community has to endure every single day. They're so afraid to just jump into that they also have to counterbalance it with this slasher storyline that quite honestly feels foreign to the movie that it's in. Which leads me to my overarching thought, as well as the ultimate irony of they/them, which is that you have a horror film trying to put a spotlight on the potential everyday horrors of simply embracing one's identity, all through a film that has a complete lack of identity. A film that wants to convey to people that you should not be afraid of being who you are, and you should not judge people for being who they are, all the while being completely afraid to be the film that it should be. Well, that's it for me, guys. If you enjoyed this review, please click over here for the rest of my 2022 new release reviews, and I'm also going to put my review of the latest Blumhouse film before this, The Black Phone, one of the best of the year. Please like and share this video and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any reviews in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.